Welcome to CMB Connect, the podcast where we go behind the designation and explore the journeys and the expert perspectives of certified mortgage bankers. I'm your host, Val Buresch, and today we have a guest whose career journey is a perfect example of that. John Lynah is the Chief Financial Officer for Mortgage Equity Partners, and his path is truly fascinating. John is a CPA, an accredited mortgage professional, and of course, a certified mortgage banker with over 25 years in financial services. And that journey has taken him quite literally around the world. It started in Massachusetts with foundational roles at the Harvard University Credit Union and State Street Bank, all while earning his master's in business administration at night from Boston University. But then his career took a major international turn. Using his dual USA and Ireland citizenship, John moved to London, and for 5 years he was a financial controller in one of the world's top financial hubs, working for JP Morgan and Barclays banks. Barclays eventually brought him back to New York as the head of financial control for their wealth management division, before he brought all of that high-level global experience to his current role at Mortgage Equity Partners. John, this is an incredible path. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to speak to you.
Likewise, and truly, John, this is so great to have you on. And in our preliminary conversation, we found out that you and I share a wonderful and very unique connection. I was born and raised in Bulgaria, and you, while working in London, bought a home on the Black Sea.
I did, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So I was in London for 5 years, as you mentioned, and my partner and I, we were a little bit bored one day and started to think about what we wanted to do. And at the time, this was before the global crash, everybody was buying property in Bulgaria on the Black Sea. And we had both sold our homes before we moved to London, so we had some money to kind of play around with. So we did for two guys in finance, we did everything that you're not supposed to do. We basically flew over there. We bought a property that hadn't been built yet. We didn't really know much about it. And it was just I know that we had talked a little bit before the call. And what was so interesting about the closing process, buying a home in Bulgaria, well, first of all, not only do you not understand the language, but you don't even understand the alphabet. It was in Cyrillic. And so, you're taking a lot of chances, but everything worked out for us great. We owned the property for the 5 years that we were there. We'd go over at least 4 or 5 times a year. It was right on the Black Sea, which was absolutely beautiful. And then when we left, we kept it for another 5 years and then rented it out. And eventually, once we got back to New York and Boston, it just didn't make any sense for us anymore. When we were in London, we could get there in 3 hours, 3-4 hours. And, when we moved back to the States, it just made no sense. But so we do have that incredible connection that I know your native country very well. A really great time for us.
Yeah, this is so fun. And you're right. It's the Black Sea is really beautiful. But I find that you've been to Bulgaria more often than I have when you lived in London. But speaking, since we are in this world of real estate, housing finance, what was the biggest culture shock or challenge you faced when you navigated the purchase? You start mentioning that you bought something that didn't exist, actually.
Yeah, so that was the other thing. When we actually bought it, we looked at plans, and there were kind of images of what was going to be built. So we had certainly done some research and found an area that we wanted to buy in and went around there. But it was really quite daunting, and risky because you're used to obviously the comfort of buying in your native country like the U.S. and bought property and have rental properties in Boston. But you're buying in a country that you don't really know. And as I said, the biggest thing is you have to get an attorney, a local attorney, and then you have to get a translator. And it was all in, as I said, in Cyrillic. What was even more interesting is when we sold it, it's a very different process than in the United States. So in Bulgaria, what you do is you say what you want to get, how much. So I'm just using an example, but say you want to get 300,000 euro for the property. That's all is that you're going to get that. Now, the realtor could go around and sell it for 400,000 euro, and you have no idea. So it's not like it's a little bit different. So, but those are just some of the chances and the risks that you take. And thankfully for us, it worked out. But it's made for some great stories over the years. So very glad we did it. Thankfully, as I said, we owned it for 10 years. But it was a very different process, and as I said, you have to get lawyers and translators, and just the process itself was much different than, not as robust as here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And certainly this is, as I mentioned, this was pre-crash, so even in the United States, a lot less documentation, and everything was, and actually the counterparty that purchased our home in Bulgaria literally showed up with cash. So,
yeah. I find that this is an incredible story, and even I don't know how to navigate those transactions. As you said, they are not so standardized. The markets are opaque, not like here. We have even don't really appreciate how much transparency we have in the purchase and the sale of real estate. Yeah.
And, in retrospect, it was a risky venture on our part, but we, when we did it, we said, we didn't spend anything we weren't willing to lose. So, but it was very daunting at the time.
John, you are actually the second guest who we had on the CMB Connect podcast who had actually spent a significant part of their career in London, in the UK. It was Mike Hyman. He was in the early part of the 2000s. He was there, but these two stories, and we'll get into your experience in a little bit, but they speak to me to the potential for international reach of our industry and specifically our designation, and the value of sharing those best practices, especially in housing finance across borders. I wanted to talk about your time at Barclays in both London and New York, and to tell us what did you work on, and how did this international experience shape your view of housing finance in the US?
Sure. Well, one thing that's just interesting, because you mentioned the designation. I went over there in 2004. I just finished my MBA. I'm very fortunate. I have dual citizenship, so I have my Irish passport as well. So I had no issues with working abroad, so I can work anywhere in the EU. But one of the really interesting things is I went over with my partner. He was on an expat assignment with State Street Bank, and I had just finished my MBA. And again, being a little bit naive, day one, he starts work for his new company, and here I am faced with trying to find a new job in a new country that I have no idea, I have no connections or anything. And one of the most interesting things, because I had done accounting all my life, so accounting and finance, and one of the most interesting things is that the MBA is not an MBA, Master's in Business Administration is not as widely recognized abroad in Europe. And so I thought I would have no issues getting a job. And what I quickly learned, especially working in accounting, is that I actually really had a very, very difficult time getting a job, despite having already worked for 15 years, especially in accounting. The accounting industry in the UK is very, my recruiter said it was a very arrogant industry, and they have several qualifications. And so my MBA did nothing for me. And I actually, at 40 years old, when I was there, I had to go back and take the CPA exam. So I had to get certified. And so it forced me to basically take the CPA exam, which was fantastic. I'm very happy that I did it. But I had to do that. And after being out of undergrad for, at least 12 or 13 years, is very tough. But the minute I passed my CPA exam, I had a job, and I got my first job at JP Chase within 2 weeks. So they're very focused on the credential and licensing. So that was part of my experience. But for me, the most kind of impactful thing about working abroad is just you start to see other people's view of the world, and not everybody looks at, I think, and by the way, I was working for a U.S. company. I was working for JP Morgan, and it was just very interesting to see other people's perspectives. So I worked with a lot of people that were part of the Commonwealth. So I worked with a lot of people from Canada, from South Africa, anybody in New Zealand, India, so anybody is part of the Commonwealth. So it's a very, very diverse workforce, and very intelligent workforce, but diverse, but also just very interesting in the way different people approach work and how they conduct business. So that was probably the most eye-opening for me.
That's a fascinating story that you had to take a CPA while in UK in order to find a job in the UK.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the most interesting thing about that is you physically have to take the exam in the United States.
Wow.
What I would do is I would get the study materials, stay in London for a few months, fly back, take the exam, and I had to do that 4 times for the 4 sections. So I had to fly back 4 times.
Now that you have the CMB designation, where do you see those connection points between the CPA designation and the CMB designation? Do you find any similarities, anything that you draw from one in order to be the other, so to speak?
Well, I mean, the CPA exam is very much finance focused. So in that respect, much more kind of finance focused, where with the CMB, you're learning all about the mortgage industry.
Yeah.
So, and that was really the reason that I took it, because I've been in financial services for almost 30 years now, always in financial, more finance roles. And what the real drive for me to take the CMB was to kind of learn the overall mortgage business. I didn't know much about, operations, hedging. Right. I did get my MLO license. So I'm also a licensed mortgage loan originator. So that part was a little bit easier for me, but just to learn about, everything about, as I said, underwriting and operations and hedging. And so it really tied the whole industry together. And I think we talked about it on our initial call, which was very interesting for me, is when I was studying for the CPA exam, I was just dreading it every day. It was something that I had to do.
Yes.
And it was very, very, very cumbersome. And as I shared with you, when I was studying for the CMB exam, I never once felt like I was studying. Every time I was kind of reviewing the material, it was just so insightful to me because it was just like, okay, well, now I understand why we're doing that, because there's a lot of things that my colleagues here and counterparts did, and I never really fully understood it. And then it just started to make so much sense to me. And so it was a really great experience. I'm so happy that I did it.
Yeah. Well, it just strikes me that you're a very disciplined person and you did it, whether you were dreading it or you were enjoying it, there is a certain level of discipline that you have to have in order to finish something. People start many things, but finishing something, especially achieving a designation, a level of education, that is discipline. And I
too, because I shared with you, I just turned 62. I think I'm probably one of the oldest people that's ever done this, but it was fantastic. It was really great.
Wonderful. And I think this conversation and where we are with taking the CPA and the CMB connects with something that I saw on your profile, a quote on your LinkedIn profile, a quote by the inventor of the Alexander method, Mr. Frederick Alexander, I think was his name. People do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. So I find that a very powerful quote. And Alexander's work, the way I understand it, was about unlearning bad physical habits to improve his performance. And so that kind of discipline, that kind of a discipline, very conscious, almost like self-coaching is interesting. And I found that interesting that you chose that quote from this man. So how do you apply this philosophy as perhaps a metaphor for your day-to-day work? What are, for example, your key habits that you've built, something that you've unlearned, something that you had to learn to be successful, to be where you are now?
Thank you. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I love my job, and I'm always working, and I don't have really a lot of habits. And believe it or not, actually, when I read, I'm kind of one of these nerds that reads. I read a lot of kind of self-help books. And I think I saw that quote, but there's a really great book. You've probably heard about it. It's called Atomic Habits. And
I love that book. Yes.
Phenomenal. It's just this great book. And you mentioned undoing bad habits. And one of the things that I really took from that book, which I'll never forget, is because it's not about just the habits, but making small daily changes, but then the compound effect of small kind of habits every day. And one of the analogies is he learned, he basically was saying, if you have somebody who smokes, if they smoke, I don't know, if they smoke a half a pack of cigarettes a day, well, over 6 months, that may not be bad. Over 3 months, it may not be bad. Over 3 years, it's worse. And over 30 years, it's very bad for you. And conversely, you can say the same thing about good habits, so a little bit of physical exercise every day over long periods of time is beneficial to you. And
Absolutely.
and that's kind of how I always kind of approach some of these challenges that I took on, whether it's the CPA exam or the CMB exam. And with the CPA exam, I remember the biggest section was financial reporting. And I remember when I started that kind of journey, I said, well, that is the biggest and most onerous kind of part of the exam. And I said, if I could pass that, then I will continue. And so I did. And so then I continued. So, but it's kind of just about those things, things can be so daunting, so I kind of break things down into very small chunks, to not make it so overwhelming. And my colleague, Dave here, he also passed. And so we both went out to, we were both in Las Vegas for the ceremony. And we were both saying how interesting it was, because when you start the journey, the goal is to get to walk across the stage in Las Vegas. And then we both said, wow, we're here. It seemed so daunting at the beginning, and you would never get there. But, all of those kind of small incremental steps to prepare for the CMB exam. I personally took School of Mortgage Banking 1, 2, 3. My colleague Dave's been in the business for like 30 years, and so he didn't have to do that. But I really felt that to get the overall breadth of this industry, I took School of Mortgage Banking 1, 2, and 3, and then the prep course. But that's my point. You take School of Mortgage Banking 1, 2, and 3, then you take the prep course, and you have your study group, and so it's a process. But if you break it down into those chunks, it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a fantastic mindset, and I love your description of how those habits. I mean, I guess the habit is breaking down in small chunks something big that you need to accomplish. You mentioned the rewarding parts of the journey and the process of becoming CMB, of being with people, just that kind of a joyful experience of the learning process, even though taking the 3 School of Mortgage Bankings is not a small feat. It's 1 week per School of Mortgage Banking. So that was a great dedication. But was there any challenging part of that process for you while you were taking the CMB, going through the CMB journey at any point?
I think like everybody, that on my part, the hedging section is very intimidating. So I'd already passed I'm a licensed mortgage loan originator, so I didn't feel as daunting by that. And because I was on the finance side was okay. But for me, it was really the hedging and servicing. To me, those are the more daunting sections of that exam.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with you. For me too.
And then also an incredible sponsor. I have to name my sponsor, Bob Mansour. I had this amazing sponsor. He's very involved in the industry. He was my teacher at one of the School of Mortgage Banking exams. And then, a great kind of team that did the review course. So
yes, Bob Mansour is an amazing professional, and I had the chance to work with him on some of the committees at the CMB Society. So bringing us to today, you're a CFO, and you mentioned you're a licensed mortgage loan officer. What, from that perspective and from your day-to-day work, what is the single most pressing regulatory or market challenge that you are currently navigating at Mortgage Equity Partners?
Well, I think for us, so I work for Mortgage Equity Partners. We are an independent mortgage bank in the United States. And so we are predominantly on the East Coast, and we're about 175 people. For us, it's certainly, for every IMB, it's margin compression. So there's a lot of margin compression. You're seeing a lot of consolidation in the industry. It's unfortunately, recently a lot of the smaller shops aren't making it, so there's a lot of consolidation in the market. And just it's really just kind of managing the thin margins. One of the things that was, again, so kind of apropos for me during the exam, when you're talking about servicing and they're talking about getting an MSR book, so we do have an MSR book, and it's so interesting how it's a great hedge to just the cyclicality, the ups and downs of the origination business. So that's something that was very germane to when I was studying. I kind of really did understand that, because this industry is so cyclical. And now I've been in this industry now about 12 years. And so I've gone through at least 2 cycles where extremely busy to extremely slow. And then how you just have to pivot. One of the things that's also really helpful for us is, as a small independent mortgage bank, our executive team we are involved with some of the trade associations. So we've gone to the Mortgage Collaborative, we've gone to Lenders One, and my CEO doesn't go all the time, but I remember he went once, and you just kind of walk out with some really great tools. And we went to a roundtable with, so for instance, there were probably 40 to 50 CEOs and CFOs in the room, and you just kind of really learn best practices. And if you can walk away with some really good tools, it's fantastic. And if nothing else, as my CEO said, even sometimes you just get the validation that you're doing everything right. So, but with the downturn, we had just left the Mortgage Collaborative, and we reacted very quickly. And unfortunately, we did to have a very small reduction in staff. But I think that because we were so ahead of it and prepared, that we went right into looking at our staff very carefully, and then we went through a major kind of cost containment program, just in terms of really looking at our costs. And when you and I talked about it, I said, I absolutely love my job and love this business. I've been in it 12 years. I wish I got into it 30 years ago. But what was so interesting is when you and I were talking, I said, actually, when everything's just flat and running smoothly, it's boring to me. I love the peaks and valleys. When it's really busy, it's all hands on deck, making sure the operations staff is manned up, doing everything you can to support them to get the loans through the pipeline. So that's extremely exciting. And, you can keep up that pace for a good amount of time. It's usually not sustainable. Your staff gets exhausted, and we were asking for bulge lines on our warehouse banks. And then on the flip side, when things turn around, you have to just really look at your cost and really just kind of rein things in. So that to me is the exciting part of this business.
Yeah, that's also a very good summarization of those challenges as well that you're facing, and your company is representative of so many others. But when you look at 2026, what do you see, and what are you hoping to accomplish as you head into 2026?
Well, again, I think you're seeing, as I said, a lot of consolidation in the market. So, one of the things I work also very closely with our head of sales. And so, you have to really grow. You have to be prepared for growth. I don't know that you survive if you're not prepared for growth. So I work very closely with our head of sales, and a lot of it also, it's just really focusing on sales. Our head of sales has two words: recruit and retain, and it's just going out. And you don't, when you'll read articles, I kind of try to stay in touch with Chrisman and Stratmore, and when you talk about acquisitions, that there's a lot of that going on in the market. But even when you're talking about, when you're looking at sustainable growth, you're almost looking at trying to acquire teams of loan officers. You can recruit loan officers one at a time, but you really start to make success if you can recruit a team and bring in 4 to 5 people at a time. So sales is probably one of our number one goals for next year. As a matter of fact, at this time during my job, as soon as we finish the third quarter, we start doing our budget. I take 9 months of data and we trend it out. And so we're in that process now of trending out the next year.
I just wonder how the market is going to look like given the current FHFA changes that they're doing, proposals that they have. And you mentioned you have to be prepared for growth as well. So staying on top of those changes and spotting the growth opportunities is additional to just having the sales teams. So when we are talking about 2026, what is the one strategic habit, small thing or small priority that you think mortgage bankers should adopt now to have a better, more successful 2026 than 2025, for example?
Sure. Well, I think, really just taking an in-depth look at your company and where you're at. One of the things, and again, it's just apropos because we do this every year at this time of year. Once I kind of go through it with my CEO, we go through the sales forecast, we build out a budget, and then we plan a 2 to 3 day offsite meeting every year where we take our whole executive team and just go offsite, because you've got to get out of the office and out of your mindset, and we start to kind of look at things more holistically. So we do a SWOT analysis, from business school. I remember SWOT analysis. So
Yes.
We look at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then we kind of do that kind of assessment. Then we pick maybe 2 to 3. We kind of really will choose 2 to 3 major goals to achieve during the year. And so consistently for the last 2 years, it's been focusing on sales, it's recruitment and retaining top talent. Then we kind of always look at on a holistic level, we look at our senior management team, and do we have, I hate to sound cliche, but we really do kind of look at, do we have the right people in the right seats and things like that.
The right people on the
Really
bus. Yeah.
What's that? Pardon me?
Whether you have the right people on the bus.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have the right people on the right bus? And then, really we try to adopt a mindset of kind of adaptability. We have to really kind of just be willing to pivot. When the market changes, you have to be willing to pivot. And then, and then we follow up. We've tried to be, in the past, we've done these offsite meetings and we get very excited about it. And then sometimes everybody gets back. It's very easy to get back kind of in the weeds. Again, not to sound cliche, but you're working kind of in the business, not on the business. So this year, especially, we tried to be very conscious of follow-up meetings. So we scheduled quarterly. We've almost had quarterly kind of follow-up, quote, like offsites, not for 2 to 3 days, but at least on a quarterly basis, try and really go back and review everything we've done and then pivot. If we've missed on some goals, we try to take action to correct that.
Yeah, that's fascinating and very, very good advice, because having those regular look backs, not only you set your strategy, but having the chance to look back, to compare, contrast yourself to your competitors and think whether you need to pivot. Sometimes maybe you don't need to pivot, but if you need to pivot, you should know when to do that, how to do it. That's so important for successful implementation of strategy and having a successful business.
Yeah, I mean, I work with amazing people, and we're very proud of the fact that our executive management team, 5 or 6 of us, but like collectively, it's like 200 years of mortgage banking experience. I'm the junior with only 12 years. I'm absolutely the one that's been in the business the least. Everybody else on our executive management team has been in this business for 20 and 30 years. And we talked about this a little bit, how this business just grabs you.
Yes. I consider that wealth.
Yeah.
That you're drawing on 200 years of experience from your team.
Yeah.
And can have those meaningful conversations internally.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit on our pre-call, and it's interesting. I literally fell into this business just one night. I was moving back to Boston. I needed a job, and I worked for a company down the street for 5 years, and I kind of just fell into it. And I thought I left and thought I would never do this again. And within 2 weeks, I had this job.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this. I think if you well, 2 things. When you go to me, what's amazing about this business is when you go to these conferences, people are genuinely happy to see each other. Like I've never worked in business like this. And whenever I go to conferences, you reconnect with everybody, and everybody's genuinely happy to see you. And I swear to you, if you're pretty decent in this business, you'll never be out of a job. People are always looking after another. I mean, as I said, they're genuinely happy to kind of see each other. And it's just, that's been a really great part of working in this business.
That's very well said, and a perfect way to end our podcast. John, thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey, including your time in Bulgaria. What a fantastic and insightful conversation. To our listeners, thank you for tuning into CMB Connect podcast. You can learn more about John Lynah in the show notes for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks very much. Thank you.